Hello, and welcome to Life Diaries, a space where the pages of life open up, one story at a time. These are tales written by experience, spoken from the heart. Take a moment for yourself, and let's begin. Arthur P. Harrington knew his time was running out. His seventh decade was already behind him, and an incurable illness was relentlessly taking its toll. He belonged to the ranks of the wealthy, having inherited not only a name, but also an entrepreneurial spirit from his ancestors. His grandfather, a descendant of nobility, didn't limit himself to owning an estate, but ventured into shipbuilding. In this field, he achieved significant success and amassed a substantial fortune. During turbulent times, he lost everything, but his business acumen remained with him. Moving to Europe, he continued building ships, and once again joined the ranks of millionaires. Arthur's father, in contrast, didn't flaunt his origins. He was educated at university, dedicated himself to studying history, and later taught. His mother was a gifted violinist and played in an orchestra. The son grew up in an atmosphere of intellectual refinement, receiving an excellent education and upbringing. Initially, he worked as an engineer, but the turbulent 90s left him jobless. It was then that he started his business from scratch. Thanks to his innate integrity and entrepreneurial talent, he succeeded in construction, opened a chain of hotels and restaurants in various cities, and engaged in real estate rentals. Arthur P. Harrington had an organic intolerance for dishonesty and greed. In business, he relied solely on trusted partners and never allowed himself to deceive clients. He managed not only to earn a significant fortune, but also to gain an unshakable authority in influential circles. That day, he dismissed his driver, deciding to walk home and breathe in the evening air. His heart felt a troubling tightness. At times, breathing became difficult, and the walk brought no relief. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his chest. He sank to the ground, and consciousness left him. David was returning after another odd job. His main salary was catastrophically insufficient. He had recently taken a job as a porter at a small hotel near the train station. The pay there was low, but tips from guests at least somewhat supplemented the meager family budget. In his early 30s, David had 3 children. The youngest, Lily, was born with cerebral palsy and required expensive treatment and constant rehabilitation. He would come home exhausted, eat dinner, and immediately go to bed, leaving all the childcare worries to his wife, Sarah. He deeply loved his quiet, gentle wife. Sarah never complained, but with each passing day, she grew thinner and paler. Perhaps he should find another additional job. Lost in gloomy thoughts, the young man didn't immediately notice the elderly man lying by the bench. Hurrying passers-by indifferently walked around him. Who knows, maybe he'd had too much to drink or something else. David tried to lift the old man and seat him on the bench, but he was motionless and didn't regain consciousness. 2 more women approached. Together, the 3 of them carefully laid the man on the bench, placing a bag under his head. The women called an ambulance, while David unbuttoned his shirt collar and began searching for a pulse. Fortunately, medical help arrived quickly. David decided to go to the hospital with the stranger to assist. He had no documents on him, but the old man's face seemed vaguely familiar. The man was admitted to the hospital without identification. David knew nothing about him, but his heart ached with pity for the lonely old man. Everything pointed to a heart attack, and his loved ones were likely unaware of what had happened. The young man decided to visit him as soon as he regained consciousness and wrote down the hospital number. Despite his busyness, David called daily to inquire about the elderly patient's condition. The man had undergone heart surgery. 3 days later, he regained consciousness, although he was still very weak. David bought some treats, cookies and fruit, and went to visit the man he had saved. "Was it you who brought me to the hospital?" the patient asked with a slight smile. My heartfelt thanks. They introduced themselves. Arthur P. Harrington didn't want to worry his family with news of the attack. His wife and children were on vacation, and he didn't want to spoil it for them. The man asked David about his life, his family, his work. The elderly man had a kind face and knew how to listen, and David, unexpectedly, told him about his difficulties. The hotel where the young man worked part-time turned out to be well known to Arthur P. Harrington. David complained about the meager salary and the staff's rudeness. Mr. Harrington, I feel like I've seen you somewhere before, I just can't remember where. It's a small world, perhaps we have, and we'll definitely see each other again. After all, you saved my life. The doctor said another half hour, and I couldn't have been saved. Oh, nonsense. Any decent person would have done the same, the young man said, blushing. He felt as though he was talking to someone very close, like a father or uncle. That's the trouble. There aren't many decent people left, Arthur P. Harrington replied sadly. They parted as friends, exchanging phone numbers. And 2 weeks later, David was astonished when Arthur P. Harrington appeared at the hotel. All the staff bustled about, wiping every speck of dust, polishing doorknobs until they gleamed. This didn't happen often. The owner himself had arrived. The employees were particularly surprised when the owner approached David with a warm smile and shook his hand firmly. And David, not at all flussled, inquired about Arthur P. Harrington's health. The next day, the manager offered the young man a position as supervisor, but he refused. He had never managed people before. On the contrary, he himself had constantly been ordered around, yelled at, even mocked for his modest clothing. Arthur P. Harrington had been married to a young beauty for several years. They had 2 sons, whose upbringing was handled by their mother. The businessman's wife lacked for nothing, loved social events, and often traveled the world. Their relationship had long become formal, more like a business arrangement. The wife returned from trips in excellent spirits but preferred not to talk about the time spent away. Arthur P. Harrington understood that the years were taking their toll, but there had been no warmth in their marriage for a long time. He also had an adult son from his first marriage who lived in America. He was nearing 50, ran a successful business, and lacked nothing. They sometimes spoke on the phone. In essence, the elderly man was very lonely. In his youth, he had friends, but their paths had diverged, and communication had ceased. The unexpected help from a stranger deeply touched him. In the young man, he sensed genuine kindness, empathy, and inner strength. Therefore, he wanted to help this good person escape poverty. But he didn't know how to do it. David would never accept help without a reason. Early one morning, there was a knock at David's apartment door. Standing on the threshold was Arthur P. Harrington with a bag full of fruit and sweets for the children. I decided to visit you and thank you personally once more. Will you offer me some tea? David introduced his new friend to his wife and little ones. It turned out the family knew nothing of what had happened, and the rescued man gladly recounted the selfless act of the husband and father. Sarah proudly remarked that her David couldn't have acted otherwise. He wouldn't pass by someone else's trouble. The children unanimously confirmed that their dad was the best and a true hero. It was clear how much the children loved their father. Everyone was touched, and David blushed with embarrassment. The guest was invited to the table. He took out delicious pastries, fruit, treated the children, praised the hostess for the tea, and even played with the boys with toy cars. Then Arthur P. Harrington offered David a job in his company, initially as a manager, but with clear prospects for growth. When he announced the salary, David thought he had misheard. Never in his life had he held such money. It felt awkward to refuse, so he agreed, although he couldn't quite believe it was happening in reality. The guest prepared to leave and said at the door, "Here's my business card. Start working tomorrow and quit all your part-time jobs today. You'll start a serious career, help yourself, and support your family and get your daughter treated." "How can I do that right away? I don't know anything at all," David said, frightened. "Don't worry, we'll teach you." Arthur P. Harrington smiled. "You'll learn for a month, and you'll get half your salary." David agreed, calculating that even this half was several times his current earnings, including his part-time jobs. That night, he couldn't sleep from excitement, while his wife Sarah gently and carefully ironed the collar of his washed shirt so her husband would look presentable at his new job. The next day, the young man went to the company's main office. He was terribly nervous, afraid of not living up to expectations. But the boss, Arthur P. Harrington, was already there. He personally showed the new employee around the offices, introduced him to the staff as his friend, and promised to personally guide him through the ropes and explain all the specifics of a manager's work. The boss was highly respected, so the modestly dressed young man was received very kindly. He was immediately processed in the HR department and even offered an advance to buy necessary clothing appropriate for the company's dress code. A month later, David was transformed. In an expensive suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie, he looked truly handsome. The new manager turned out to be remarkably intelligent and persistent. He quickly mastered all the intricacies of the profession, the process of document handling, and the art of dealing with clients. Soon, he surpassed many old-timers and became the company's leading manager. David worked hard, often returning home long after midnight. 2 years passed. David reached significant career heights, becoming the company's managing director. He no longer needed to ask colleagues for advice. He handled all matters perfectly on his own. At the same time, he didn't become arrogant and maintained good relationships with the staff. He and his boss developed a warm, almost familial relationship. They often visited each other's homes. Their children were roughly the same age and happily played together. Arthur P. Harrington fully trusted David, treating him like a son. David's family life changed dramatically. He bought a car, acquired a spacious new apartment near the office, and hired a nanny to help his wife with the children. And the youngest daughter received the necessary treatment and rehabilitation at a specialized center. Her illness gradually receded, becoming almost unnoticeable. Lily could now walk confidently on her own. Her parents rejoiced immensely and thanked their benefactor. One day, the boss invited the managing director over and offered him full responsibility for managing the company during his absence. He was scheduled to travel to Germany for medical treatment, possibly requiring heart surgery. David agreed. He had successfully managed the firm several times before when the owner was away on business trips. Soon, sad news arrived from Germany. Arthur P. Harrington had passed away during the operation. The managing director made all necessary arrangements and went home. Tears flowed involuntarily down his face. His wife Sarah also wept, and Lily cried with her. She loved Grandpa very much. Moreover, it was unknown how the heirs would handle the company. Most likely, he would have to part with his beloved job. A few days later, David was invited by the notary for the reading of the will. David was puzzled as to what connection he had to his boss's inheritance. On the appointed day, the young man arrived at the specified address. Several people he didn't know were already sitting in the office, as well as Arthur P. Harrington's wife. The text of the will stated that the apartment, country house, and the main part of the capital went to the wife and children. However, his entire company, including hotels and office buildings, Arthur P. Harrington bequeathed to the former porter who had given him a few extra years of life, and now the company's managing director. He alone, in the testator's opinion, would be able to preserve his life's work. Everyone present's eyes widened in astonishment. David himself was so stunned he couldn't utter a word. The young man had always believed that Arthur P. Harrington had taken him under his wing out of pity, that his career was only possible thanks to the owner's kindness. But he could never have imagined that the boss would leave him an entire company as an inheritance. The man left the office feeling numb and went straight home. "Sarah, can you believe it? I got an inheritance from the boss." "What inheritance?" Sarah didn't immediately understand what her husband was saying. "The owner left me the entire company with all its branches. Me, a simple porter." "Oh, David, you're so talented. That's why Mr. Harrington valued you." Sarah wiped away a tear. "He was such a good man." "I'm so lucky to have you, Sarah." The couple hugged and sat down to have tea together. After that, David was dragged through the courts for 6 months. The deceased's relatives tried to prove that the owner was mentally incapacitated, but these claims found no confirmation. The young man himself was ready to renounce the inheritance, but the notary handed him a note from Arthur P. Harrington, where he explained his decision and asked him not to yield to provocations, as the relatives would ruin his life's work, while David could continue his projects. When the lawsuits were over, he became the rightful owner of a huge company. That's how one simple act of kindness drastically changed the life of an ordinary man.